Picture this. You are finally living on your own. Your parents are out for the night, or you are just hanging out in a basement you've been in 100 times before. It feels like the safest place in the world. Until one tiny sound makes your stomach drop. A light that is already on. A strange tapping beneath your feet. A football rolling out of complete darkness. Or a voice that sounds exactly like your mom, even though she isn't there. These aren't made-up ghost stories or creepy urban legends. They're real experiences shared by ordinary people who all discovered the same terrifying truth. Sometimes the scariest thing hiding in a basement isn't what you imagine. It is what is actually waiting down there. From a homeless man secretly living beneath someone's home for months, to an intruder who disappeared without a trace, to a family secret that may have stayed buried for decades. These stories only get more disturbing as they unfold. By the end of this video, you might never look at your basement the same way again. You know that feeling when something seems a little off, but your brain instantly comes up with a perfectly reasonable explanation? That is exactly how this first story began. Looking back, the warning signs were there from the start. The problem was, nobody expects real danger to be hiding inside their own home. The storyteller had just bought his very first house. He was only 24, fresh out of college, finally landing a solid job and enjoying the excitement that came with owning a place of his own. Like a lot of first-time homeowners, he wasn't using every room regularly. The basement was huge, but aside from storing random boxes and doing laundry, he barely spent any time down there. About 8 or 9 months after moving in on an ordinary weeknight, he headed downstairs with a basket of dirty clothes. Nothing felt unusual, until he noticed something that made him pause. The basement lights were already on. For a second, it caught him off guard. But then he shrugged it off. We've all done it before, right? You leave a light on without realizing it and don't think twice about it. So he convinced himself he'd simply forgotten to switch them off the last time he was downstairs. That simple assumption almost turned into the biggest mistake of his life. As he reached the bottom of the stairs, something moved just outside his direct line of sight. It was only a split-second glimpse from the corner of his eye, but it was enough to make him freeze. His head snapped toward the movement, and he found himself staring directly at another human being. A filthy man was crouched behind one of the folding tables in the basement. The storyteller described him as looking like he just crawled out of a sewer. His clothes were filthy, his appearance was disturbing, and for one long, silent moment, neither of them moved. Imagine expecting to do a load of laundry, and instead locking eyes with a complete stranger hiding beneath your own house. Then everything exploded into motion. Without saying a single word, the man suddenly stood up and sprinted deeper into the basement, disappearing into the shadows before the homeowner could even process what he'd just seen. His survival instincts immediately kicked in. Instead of chasing the stranger, he slowly backed toward the staircase, never taking his eyes off the darkness ahead. Every step felt heavier than the last. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it echoing inside his head. He was only seconds away from reaching the stairs. But that is when the entire basement was swallowed by darkness. Every single light went out at once. And what happened next turned an already terrifying encounter into a complete nightmare. The lights didn't flicker. They didn't dim. They simply shut off all at once, as if someone had deliberately flipped the breaker. 1 second, the basement was brightly lit. The next, it was completely black. Not the kind of darkness where your eyes eventually adjust. This was absolute darkness. The kind where you can't even see your own hand in front of your face. Every shelf, every box, every staircase vanished instantly. For a split second, his brain froze. Then pure panic took over. He spun around and lunged toward where he thought the stairs were. But without any light, he completely lost his sense of direction. His foot caught on something lying on the concrete floor, and he crashed down hard. The laundry basket flew out of his hands, clothes scattering across the basement. The impact knocked the air out of his lungs before he even had a chance to get back up. Something grabbed him. A hand clamped around his ankle with incredible force. It wasn't a light grab. It wasn't someone trying to get his attention. It felt like whoever was holding him had no intention of letting him leave. His heart nearly stopped. He couldn't see the man. He couldn't tell exactly where he was. All he knew was that something was pulling at his leg from somewhere in the darkness. He kicked wildly again. And again, his shoe connected with something solid, followed by a painful grunt somewhere in the blackness. The grip loosened for just a fraction of a second. That tiny opening was all he needed. He ripped his leg free and scrambled across the floor, barely keeping his balance as he stumbled toward the staircase. His hands slammed into the steps and he practically crawled upward, driven entirely by adrenaline. The moment he reached the top, he yanked the basement door shut with every ounce of strength he had. He barely had time to lock it. Bang, the door shook violently. Another slam. Then another. The stranger was throwing his entire body against the other side, trying to force the door open. Each impact rattled the frame. The homeowner stood there, bracing the door with his shoulder, convinced it was only a matter of time before it gave way. Every crash sounded louder than the last, echoing through the silent house. Then, everything stopped. No footsteps, no banging, no voices, just complete silence. After what felt like forever, he grabbed his phone and called 911, struggling to explain that someone had been hiding in his basement and had just attacked him. Police officers arrived within minutes and searched every inch of the house. The basement was empty. The man had disappeared. At first, it seemed impossible. There was nowhere obvious to hide, and somehow he'd escaped before officers could corner him. But as investigators looked more closely, they uncovered something even more disturbing. The stranger hadn't just broken in that night. He had been secretly living inside the basement for months. Hidden among the storage boxes were makeshift sleeping areas, scraps of food, empty containers, and clear signs that someone had been treating the basement as a home while the owner went about his daily life completely unaware. Think about that for a second. Every night, while he slept upstairs believing he was alone, a complete stranger was living just one floor beneath him, and he had no idea. But as terrifying as that story is, the next one proves that sometimes the person hiding in your basement isn't planning to stay hidden for long. If you think discovering someone secretly living beneath your house is terrifying, wait until you hear what happened to the next storyteller. He was only 14 years old. His parents had traveled out of state for a wedding, leaving him home alone for the weekend. At first, it felt like every teenager's dream. The house was quiet, no one was around to tell him to go to bed, and he had the entire place to himself. Everything was perfectly normal until around midnight. That is when he heard it. Tap, tap, tap. It wasn't loud. In fact, it was so faint that he almost ignored it. At first, it sounded like tiny pebbles hitting the outside siding of the house. Maybe a tree branch swaying in the wind, maybe an animal, maybe even the weather. He tried not to think about it, but the tapping didn't stop. Instead, it moved, slowly. The sound traveled around the outside of the house until it seemed to settle directly beneath the living room, right above the basement. The moment he realized where the noise was coming from, a knot formed in his stomach. Most people would have locked themselves in a bedroom and called the police immediately. Instead, curiosity got the better of him. He walked toward the basement door. Every step felt heavier than the last. The house had become eerily quiet. The only sound left was his own breathing and the occasional tap echoing from below. He wrapped one hand around the doorknob. For a second, he hesitated. His instincts were screaming at him not to open that door, but he convinced himself there had to be a logical explanation. Slowly, he turned the knob. The basement door creaked open just a few inches. A wave of cold air drifted up the staircase. He didn't dare walk down. Instead, he pulled out his phone. Trying to stay as far away as possible, he switched on the camera, enabled the flash, and stretched his arm into the darkness, recording a short video without actually stepping into the basement. It seemed like the safest way to check if anyone or anything was down there. For several long seconds, nothing happened. He couldn't see much from where he stood. Finally, he closed the door and hurried back into the living room. His hands were shaking as he opened the recording. The flashlight illuminated shelves, a few storage boxes, part of the concrete floor. Then the camera slowly drifted toward one of the basement windows. That is when his blood ran cold. Standing completely still beneath the window was a person. Not moving, not hiding, just silently staring toward the staircase where he had been standing only moments earlier. The figure hadn't made a sound. It hadn't tried to run. It simply stood there in the darkness as though it had been waiting. The teenager felt every ounce of courage disappear. He didn't stop to look at the video again. He didn't try to figure out who it was. He sprinted to his bedroom, slammed the door shut, locked it, and immediately called his father, barely able to get the words out. Within minutes, his dad contacted the police, and officers raced to the house. By the time they searched the basement, the mysterious figure was gone. But what investigators discovered next made the entire situation even more chilling. Police officers searched the basement from top to bottom. Flashlights swept across every corner. They checked behind shelves, inside closets, beneath the staircase, anywhere someone could possibly hide. But the mysterious figure from the video had vanished. It was as if they had disappeared into thin air. At first, the teenager wondered if he'd imagined the whole thing. Maybe the camera angle had played tricks on him. Maybe fear had distorted what he saw. But then he looked at the recording again. There it was. The figure was unmistakable. A person had been standing in his basement. The officers quickly figured out how the intruder escaped. One of the small basement windows had been opened just enough for someone to climb through. Whoever had been hiding inside must have heard the police arriving and slipped out before they reached the house. That alone was terrifying. A stranger had been inside while a 14-year-old was home alone. But the investigation wasn't over. As the officers continued checking the basement, one of them walked into the small kitchenette. It wasn't anything fancy, just a sink, a few cabinets, and a wooden knife block sitting on the counter. The officers stopped. Something wasn't right. One of the slots in the knife block was empty. He asked the teenager if a knife was supposed to be missing. The boy wasn't sure, so he called his father again. His dad immediately knew exactly what the officer meant. The largest kitchen knife they owned was gone. Every other knife was still neatly in place. Only the biggest one had disappeared. The realization hit everyone at once. The intruder hadn't just entered the house. He had armed himself before escaping. No one knows whether he grabbed the knife before the teenager heard the tapping or after he realized someone was home. No one knows if he intended to confront the boy or simply wanted a weapon while making his escape. And perhaps the most unsettling question of all, what if the teenager had actually walked down those basement stairs instead of recording with his phone? He would have entered a dark basement where an unknown person was standing silently in the shadows. A person who may have already been holding the biggest knife in the house. It is impossible to know what would have happened. Maybe nothing. Or maybe that decision to stay at the top of the stairs was the only reason this story had a happy ending. Sometimes survival isn't about being brave. Sometimes it is about listening to that quiet voice telling you that something isn't right. Unfortunately, the next story proves that even when every door and window appears locked, some mysteries have no explanation at all. A quiet Friday night, a cat named Rocky, and something hidden in a dark storage room that shouldn't have been there. The third story starts out like an ordinary Friday night. No creepy noises, no strange shadows, just two teenagers hanging out in a finished basement. The storyteller grew up in a large suburban house. Unlike the dark, unfinished basements from the previous stories, this one had been remodeled into a comfortable hangout space. There was a television, couches, games, and enough room for friends to spend hours together. One Friday evening, he invited a girl named Madeline over. They were relaxing, talking, and enjoying the night without a single reason to feel nervous. Like always, his cat Rocky had supposedly been placed in the basement before bedtime so he wouldn't wander upstairs and wake his parents. Rocky was a playful cat. He was constantly knocking things over, scratching at boxes, and darting around the storage area. So when they heard rustling coming from the back storage room, neither of them thought much about it. It must be Rocky. That explanation made perfect sense. The noises continued every few minutes. A shuffle, a light thump, something brushing against cardboard boxes. Both of them laughed it off. Cats make noise all the time. Then everything changed. From the top of the basement stairs, they heard scratching, not from the storage room, from the basement door itself. Scritch, scritch, scritch. It sounded exactly like a cat trying to get someone's attention. The storyteller frowned. That didn't make any sense. If Rocky was making noise behind them in the storage room, who or what was scratching at the basement door? He walked toward the stairs. The scratching continued. When he reached the top and opened the basement door, there stood Rocky, looking up at him, waiting to be led inside. For a second, his mind simply refused to process what he was seeing. The cat was outside the basement, which meant whatever had been making all those noises inside the storage room wasn't Rocky. A cold silence settled over the basement. Neither of them spoke. They slowly looked back toward the dark storage area. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound. The room seemed completely still. Maybe they had imagined everything. Maybe there really was another explanation then. Without warning, a small foam football rolled out from the darkness. It didn't bounce down from a shelf. It didn't fall off a box. It rolled smoothly across the floor, straight toward them. Someone had thrown it. The football traveled several feet before stopping in the middle of the room. Neither teenager moved. Neither one said a word. There was only one place that football could have come from. The pitch-black storage room. And someone or something had been inside it the entire time. The storyteller grabbed Madeline's hand. Neither of them waited to investigate. Neither of them called out to see if anyone was there. Every instinct screamed the same thing. Run. They bolted up the stairs, Rocky racing alongside them, and slammed the basement door behind them. Breathing hard, they immediately called the police. Officers arrived quickly and conducted a thorough search of the entire basement. Every closet, every storage shelf, every crawl space. Nothing, no person, no footprints. No evidence that anyone had been hiding there. Then they checked every possible entrance. Every basement window was locked. From the inside, there were no broken locks, no damaged screens, no signs of forced entry. According to the evidence, no one should have been able to get into that basement. Yet something had clearly thrown that football. To this day, neither the storyteller nor Madeline has ever found an explanation for what happened that night. And if that mystery wasn't unsettling enough, the final story isn't about a stranger breaking into a basement. It is about a family secret that may have been hidden there for years. The final story happened when the storyteller was just 9 years old. At that age, basements don't usually feel creepy. They're where you play games, watch movies, or escape the adults for a while. For him, the basement was his favorite place in the house. He'd spend hours down there playing video games, completely lost in whatever adventure was on the screen. One night, long after most kids his age would have been asleep, he was doing exactly that. The only sounds in the room were the television and the occasional clicks of his controller. Everything felt completely normal. Then he heard it. The laundry room door slowly creaked open. At first, he barely looked up. He figured one of his parents had come downstairs. Then came a sound that instantly caught his attention. A woman was moaning, soft, slow, almost as if she were trying to get someone's attention. He smiled. It sounded exactly like his mom. His first thought wasn't fear. It was amusement. He laughed to himself, convinced his mother was trying to scare him as some kind of harmless prank. So he decided to play along. Still smiling, he stood up from the couch and walked toward the laundry room. The closer he got, the darker that part of the basement became. The glow from the television faded behind him. The laundry room doorway was mostly in shadow. Then he saw someone standing there. At first, just an outline, a silhouette. The figure wasn't moving. It simply stood in the doorway. He expected his mom to burst out laughing at any second. Instead, something felt wrong. The person's height, the posture, the way they were standing, none of it looked familiar. He suddenly realized that wasn't his mother. The laughter disappeared instantly. Every instinct told him to get away. Without saying a word, he turned around and sprinted upstairs as fast as his legs could carry him. He burst into the living room, breathing so hard he could barely speak. Both of his parents were sitting there together, watching television. His mother hadn't been downstairs, she hadn't called his name, she hadn't tried to prank him. The person in the basement couldn't have been her. Still shaken, he told his parents exactly what had happened. He explained that he'd heard someone who sounded just like Mom. He described the figure standing in the laundry room. His parents exchanged a quick glance. Then they smiled. "Oh," one of them said casually. "That was probably Debbie, just a friend playing a prank." The explanation seemed oddly specific, but at 9 years old, he accepted it. Kids trust their parents. If they said everything was fine, then maybe it was. Life moved on. Years passed. The strange memory slowly faded into the background, until adulthood. Curious about his family's history, he started researching his family tree. As he dug through old records and relatives' names, one name immediately caught his attention: Debbie. He'd never heard much about her growing up. According to family records, Debbie wasn't just a family friend. She was his aunt. Even stranger, relatives described her as mentally unstable. Then came the detail that made his childhood memory rush back all at once. He'd always been told she had died. If that was true, who had he seen standing in the basement that night? Why had his parents immediately called the mysterious woman Debbie? And why had they brushed the whole thing off so quickly instead of checking the basement themselves? The storyteller eventually came to a theory that still haunts him. He believes his parents may have secretly been caring for his troubled aunt inside the basement without telling anyone. When he unexpectedly encountered her that night, they may have invented the friend playing a prank story to keep him from asking questions. Of course, he'll probably never know the truth. Maybe it really was an innocent misunderstanding. Maybe there was another explanation entirely. Or maybe some family secrets are buried so deeply that they stay hidden forever. One thing is certain. Whether it was a stranger secretly living beneath someone's home, an intruder silently waiting in the darkness, an impossible mystery inside a locked basement, or a secret that may have stayed hidden within a family for years, these stories all remind us of one unsettling reality. Sometimes the most terrifying place in a house isn't the attic, it isn't the hallway, it is the basement. The place directly beneath your feet, the place you assume is empty, the place where, every now and then, something or someone is waiting.